Now, welcome, dear Jean-Pierre, and possible spiritual beings or elemental beings that may do us a favor and look into this lecture which I'm going to give. We're in the Herbert Witzenmann Center, right opposite the Goetheanum. It's a few minutes after 3 in the afternoon, and my first words are of thanks to the people of this house who allowed me to speak here again. I was here last week. I spoke in German on the same topic, which is the entombment of the Anthroposophical Society and its possible resurrection. There is an under subtitle, a long one, which is a kind of a proposition, if not an insight, which reads, "Why a fateful misunderstanding made by those responsible for the chronology. It is this document, the chronology, who are responsible for it, which was submitted to and endorsed by the General Assembly of the General Anthroposophical Society in 2022 as part of the discharge given for the year's work done by the Executive Council, that this endorsement signified the official abolishment, i.e. an entombment of the Christmas Conference Society, and how its resurrection can be envisioned and achieved by the restoration and realization of its founding statutes, which are not only the exoteric counterpart to the foundation stone meditation, but also the ideational image of the representative of humanity." Now that's a long sentence, maybe not completely substantiated, it's just a subtitle. And I want to start my lecture with a meditation that was given by Rudolf Steiner to the members of the Central Council in waiting on the eve of the Christmas conference on December 23, 1923. December 23rd, 1923, as part of an esoteric class. In other words, the 5 original members, right? Marie Steiner, Albert Steffen, Ita Werkman, Elizabeth Frede, and Günther Wachsmuth. It's a kind of an oath which they had to submit to, and it went as follows. "Consciousness filled me that I must be a temple for the cosmogenic word. My eye learneth to see in the darkness. My mouth speaketh in silence. My heart learneth to feel in purity of spirit. I see sun spirit and moon soul. I speak God's word for earth ears. I feel the flow of spirit in human blood. Extinguished in me is personal vanity. Burnt out is personal ambition. Banished are the outbursts of anger by my will. Thus, the focus is only on our own doing, and criticism of others averted. I have assumed the serious obligation. I remain faithful to it and adhere to it. I will no longer leave the circle and never forget the obligation. In other words, an obligation that the 5 members with Rudolf Steiner would create an etheric bond, and that should never be broken. Now, the tragedy is that Willi Zeiss, who has written a book together with Harald Giersch, a book called General Renewal or Illusion of the Anthroposophical Society, in which he, out of his spiritual research, Willi Zeiss, explains exactly how each of these 5 members broke this bond, didn't keep the obligation. The council split up in various factions, and in the end only Albert Stephan and Wachsmuth remained. This, of course, is not a very pleasant thought. So many people think that this document is falsification. But you can read it. I've translated parts of it. I don't know if there's something I could write with here. No, I forgot to realize that. But on my website, Willehalm Institute, all one word, .blogspot.l, you can read this article called The Proceedings on the Eve of the Christmas Conference on December 23rd, 1923. You have this meditation, introduction by Willi Zeiss, and how the various council members couldn't keep this oath. Now, this book is called in German, The Loss of the General Anthroposophical Society, and that the Anthroposophical Society no longer exists, that it has been laid to rest, has been entombed, is a proposition, is a conviction even, shared by many people. Even the title of this book, The Loss of the General Anthroposophical Society, already reveals that. That's only one of the 3 that I'm going to put forward at the beginning of my lecture. The second one, quotation, is a quotation by Valentin Tomberg from his book Christ and Sophia, Anthroposophic Meditations on the New Testament, chapter Higher Stages of the Passion, page 288. And I quote, "Entombment is not just a spiritual experience that occurs once. It is especially a condition in which human beings must again and again, in 1,000 cases, choose entombment. They must decide in the form of actions that must is written like this, that must be unsuccessful in the given situations. They place them in the tomb of earthly events, hoping that in the future they will rise again as results. Thus, for example, Rudolf Steiner's activity on behalf of the threefold social order was an entombment, one among many. but one in which we have become generally aware that it was so, and gradually it will dawn upon us that other things in the life and work of Rudolf Steiner were also entombments. So Valentin Thomberg mentions threefold idea, but I think, and this is my title of my lecture, I think also the Anthroposophical Society has come into an entombment by the faithful misunderstanding in this document, this chronology on the constitutional events, which was endorsed by the General Assembly in 2022. And I'll make that more and more evident as we go along. I have about an hour. I'll speak to about 10 after 4, and then perhaps we could discuss some of the things we've said, or call it a day. Well, that was the second quotation, reference. The third one is very short and reads, "The social corporeality of the Anthroposophical Society is dead." And that writes Judith van Halle in her book, Crisis as Chance, not translated in English, Crisis als Chance, it's a German title, published in Dornach in 2010. That as an introduction, these three quotations to show that there is widespread conviction by people outside of the beginning of the council. These are people not in the council who say this, but I will argue that now the council has also joined this chorus of voices that the Anthroposophical Society has been laid to rest, and that we need to find ways to resurrect it. Now, in my announcement, I have said that this is the second time that I've been able to speak in this seminar room of the Herbert Witzenmann Center. I mean, last weekend I spoke, but in 2018 I held a seminar, organized a free working group under the title "The Christmas Conference as a Contemporary Metamorphosis of the Mystery of Golgotha and its Realization as an Eternal Task." The Christmas Conference as a Contemporary Metamorphosis of the Mystery of Golgotha and its Realization as an Eternal Task. It's a quotation from Herbert Witzenmann, after whom this building is named, from his book, commentary of 13 parts on Rudolf Steiner's book, Christianity as Mystical Fact and the Mysteries of Antiquity, which I've partly translated. It's online, and I will give the exact link when I put this video online on YouTube and in the description. But the conviction that Herbert Witzenmann develops in this book, a great commentary on this book by Rudolf Steiner, is that through the Christmas conference there was a metamorphosis of the Christianity of faith to a Christianity of knowledge. You see, that's a qualitative paradigm, a qualitative jump, you might say, because the Christianity of faith that was given 2,000 years ago is no longer up to the critical mind of the present consciousness soul. The consciousness soul wants to know instead of only believe. This is one aspect of belief. Valentin Thomberg has another one, but I'm now voicing the concept of belief by Witzenmann. Now, in 2018, I not only held a seminar here, but also entered a motion to the General Assembly, which I did every year following that until last year. They're all listed in the announcement. I won't repeat them because you can find them on this Willehalm Institute blog. I've also written a number of articles. For example, I'll just name one of them: The New Knowledge Christianity, the Christmas Conference as the Emergence in the Sixth Cultural Age and What Has Become of It. That was a conference the Willehalm Institute organized in The Hague last year, which is partly filmed also, and which tried to substantiate the idea, which I haven't read anywhere else, that the Christmas conference is a preparation for the next sixth Slavic cultural age that will only begin in a few thousand years. And I came to that idea when I read the only lecture that Rudolf Steiner gives on Manichaeism in Berlin, 1904, I think, Gesamtausgabe 93, where he says that the organizational form, the structure of Christianity, has been taken over from the Roman Empire, which lasted until about 1500. Then this structure was no longer valid. It became outdated because people have left the Verstandesseele, the intellectual soul, and became on the way to the consciousness soul. And there needed to be a new organizational form for Christianity. And Rudolf Steiner says, Mani, with his followers, will create this new form for Christianity, for the true Christianity, which will only be realized in the next cultural age, the sixth age, right? Now, my insight, which I haven't read anywhere else, but I've propagated this in some of these motions, that Rudolf Steiner, representing Mani, intended with the Christmas conference this new organizational form for the true Christianity of the future. So this is an important thought, is an important event. And when Rudolf Steiner spoke on January 1st, 1924, at the end of the Christmas conference, he said, this is the beginning of a new Weltenzeitenwendeanfang in German, beginning of a starting point, a cosmic starting point in time of a new era, so to speak. He referred to the fact that with the Christmas conference, the preparation was started for the next cultural age of the true brotherhood. So that gives an idea of the significance of the Christmas conference. Now, the last article that I wrote of these various articles since many, many years was a contribution to the social scientific conference in June here at the Goetheanum, the first of three, with the title, I have it here, A Spiritual Social Work of Art in the Making. And the first part of this three conferences was focused on what was intended with the Christmas conference. Second part is what became of it, and the third part is what wants to become in the future. In other words, past, present, and future. I wrote this article and I distributed it to the people there in German, and it ended with the following sentence, my article there. We are not, as some claim, in the wrong society, but in the right one. Only that the social organic corporeality, the social body of the Anthroposophical Society has been seriously damaged or even injured, which therefore has to be restored in order to serve as the organizational form for the preparation of the new Christianity of the next sixth Slavic cultural age. Whether the centenary, which we are celebrating this year, 100 years Christmas conference, will be really a celebration or a tragedy will depend on whether this task will be taken up. This task of restoring the form for the new Christianity. Because as Reto Andrea Salvadelli in this book, Principles Against Statutes, has shown, let me just drink a little water. And I have translated an earlier version of one of the articles in here, which is called the Loss of the Social Aesthetic Qualification in the Anthroposophical Society. He doesn't say that the Anthroposophical Society is dead. What he says is that 15 articles make up the constitution of the Anthroposophical Society, 15 statutes. And of these 15 statutes, 9 have been not understood, misunderstood, misused, or dismembered. Now, what does that mean? It means that of the 15 statutes, they are structured in such a way that 4 of these statutes are outward going. They give goals of the society, motives in terms of philosophy of freedom. 4 other statutes are inward going. They all mention people, and people have goals that they need to realize. And in order to connect the people with the goals, you need middle organs with a double middle, of which there are 7, and they connect the polarity. And you have here the archetype of the threefold order, which is 2 polarities connected with a double middle. Human organism is like that, and the head and the metabolism connected with the heart and the lungs. In the social organism, the economic life as a polarity to the spiritual life connected with the rights life. In other words, also this archetypal structure of the threefold order you find in these statutes of the Anthroposophical Society, which are the exoteric part of the foundation stone meditation. The outward going statutes are connected to spirit vision. You're looking into the distance. Even the Goetheanum over there in the west part of the Goetheanum rolls out like that, right? The polarity on the back of the Goetheanum, that refers to the inward-going statutes, which is Geist der Innen, spiritual remembrance. You go into the depth, and the eastern wall of the Goetheanum is completely vertical. It's like this. It's going into the depth, as opposed to the western part. And both sides, the north and south, are symmetric. That is the middle. And that corresponds to Geist besinnen, Geist, spirit besinnen, contemplation. That is always weighing this, is it this or that, you see? So this is also shown by Herbert Witzenmann in my translation of this book, the Prinzipien der Allgemeinen Anthroposophischen Gesellschaft, which I have translated as Charter of Humanity, the Principles of the General Anthroposophical Society as a way of life and path of training, in which he shows this basic archetypal structure of the statutes and the relation to the foundation stone meditation, right? But that's not all, because these statutes are also an ideational image of the representative of humanity, right? There you also have a threefoldness. You have in the center the Christ being, which is double, because on the one hand, he overcomes or induces complete sympathy with Lucifer. Lucifer is converted at the sight of Christ hanging at the cross. And on the other, the terrestrial force of Ahriman is also kept in bounds. You see, so these statutes are an inner path which I have tried to explain in some of these motions since 2018 of the middle path, the small narrow path of man to God's celestial kingdom of freedom and love as man. In other words, it's since the Christ came on earth, he earthed God's kingdom, and we as human beings have to further the celestial kingdom on earth, which is something that also Valentin Tomberg has explained in these lectures on the studies on the New Testament, in which he says the task of the friends of God who had a monastery in the Hermitage in the 14th century. They were located in Basel. Task of the friends of God is to create the kingdom of heaven on earth, because there are four kingdoms: mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, and animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. But the human kingdom is not finished. The human kingdom must become a kingdom of freedom and love on earth. Since the fall of man, this must be done, and one of the ways it can be done, according to Valentin Tomberg's philosophy of freedom. You can read all about this. Now that's some substantiation of this importance of the Christmas Conference Foundation statutes. But since I came back from Dornach in Amsterdam on July 1st this year, I first realized what is actually happening here with this chronology on the Constitution. You know, the fact that the Constitution of the Anthroposophical Society is the form that the Anthroposophical movement needs for its cultivation on the earth, which Rudolf Steiner writes on January 13 of 1924, is not mentioned there at all. This chronology only looks at the legal aspects. Methodology is only abstract, soulless, legalistic thinking. It doesn't at all go into the spiritual natures of the statutes, the fact that they have been abrogated, and doesn't also go into what Rudolf Steiner meant with the Anthroposophical movement, which is the movement that the spiritual beings around Michael showed the anthroposophical souls and the cultus of Michael, and that they were bound to bring down to earth in the form of the Christmas conference. But this idea which the Vorstand has been allied to from the 24-25 to around 2000 has been overturned in a sort of palace revolution. In 2002, or between 2000 and 2003, the council left the idea, abandoned the idea that there is a continuity between the Christmas conference and the present General Anthroposophical Society. And why? Because they said Rudolf Steiner, through Günter Wachsmuth, was of the opinion that with the renaming of the Goetheanum Bauverein, the Goetheanum Building Association, there was a fusion, a union between the Christmas conference and the renamed General Anthroposophical Society. But what gained the upper hand was the idea by many abstract critics, with the so-called two societies theory. They said no, on February 8, 1925, there was a split, not a union, but a split between the General Anthroposophical Society and the Anthroposophical Society of the Christmas Conference, which is almost impossible to think that Rudolf Steiner would want to create two societies, one called General Anthroposophical Society and one called Anthroposophical Society, because this is not allowed you cannot create two societies with such similar names. Yeah. But anyways, this chronology was presented as a working paper, including myself and a few third-party experts. And with this lecture, I want to distance myself from the fourth chapter of this chronology. The chronology consists of 4 chapters, and I'm only concerned with the last chapter, which deals with the so-called the emergence of the constitutional questions. I'm also not against clearing this question of the Constitution, but I'm totally against the result, the conclusion, which I will now try to make clear. This is what, in the continuity of the attempt made by Paul Mackay as a leader of the council at that time, to rescind, to abandon the present General Anthroposophical Society and create a new society and to base it on the statutes, which he could have done by just keeping the old society, the present one, and restore the statutes. So he didn't conceive of that for whatever reason. But now this has succeeded in his successor, Gerald Hefner, as leader of the social science section. He wrote in this paper for this social science section in June, following. At Christmas 1923-24, Rudolf Steiner refounded the Anthroposophical Society. With his preparation and under his formative design, a unique incarnation process took place that encompassed the spiritual as well as the earthly social world in a previously unknown way. Now, fine. We think that we agree with that. This is the ground on which we stand today as members of the Anthroposophical Society. This is how we understand it. Fine. But the reality is different. It's not like that. Even during the Christmas conference, Rudolf Steiner pointed out that the Constitution was not yet complete. In particular, the attempts he made to form so-called appropriate relation to the Goetheanum Building Association were never brought to a conclusion in his lifetime. After Rudolf Steiner's death, there were, to put it cautiously, misunderstandings that resulted in the society founded at Christmas 1923 continuing its life within the legal body of the former Building Association from 1925. How could this happen? And what does it mean for today's Anthroposophical Society? Which statutes are valid and which statutes should be valid in the future? Now, Rudolf Steiner has very, very clearly said to Wachsam Maxmut, the statutes of the Christmas conference are predominant, are important. The statutes of the renamed Building Association is just for the outside world. Don't focus on that. Realize the statutes of the Christmas conference. That is the important thing. But he asked the question, which of the two are valid? Whereas Rudolf Steiner clearly answered that question. The work group initiated by the Section for Social Sciences, he continues, for which the section, together with the Council of the Anthroposophical Society in Germany, assumed responsibility, started an inquiry in 2019 and has now largely finished its work. A first interim report reveals shocking events. What do the events outlined mean for our society today and tomorrow? How can these events be processed? And how can they be healed? And how can we develop our society in accordance with Rudolf Steiner's intention at a spiritual, legal, and economic level to make it viable for the future? Now you can read that text in the Goetheanum Worldwide, number 6 from 2023 on page 7, under the title Processing of the Constitutional History and the Future Structure of the Anthroposophical Society. It's a little bit longer from what I read there. Now, shocking events. We don't stand on the real grounds anymore. Now, this is my answer now to him. As I have often pointed out, and most recently in my proposal in the spring at the General Assembly of the General Anthroposophical Society, the cross of the Christmas conference as the constitution of the new Christianity, Rudolf Steiner very well created this real ground on which we can continue building. Thus, on December 27, 1923, he said, the Central Council will have to consider as its task only the realization of the statutes. It will have to do everything that lies in the direction of the realization of the statutes. And with that, and with this, great freedom is given, the freedom statutes. But at the same time, one knows what one has in the Central Council because one has the statutes and can gain from them a complete picture of what it will ever do. This Rudolf Steiner placed the statutes above the council. There are people who are saying, Rudolf Steiner is no longer here. We can no longer realize these statutes. No, Rudolf Steiner placed the statutes above the council, or above him. And he says, you can gain from them a complete picture of what it will ever do. Now, this complete picture has to a large extent been drawn out, been pictured by Herbert Witzenmann in these so-called 4 social aesthetic studies, of which I've translated 2 of them. The second one is called, in German, Gestalten oder Verwalten, Rudolf Steiner's Sozialorganik, ein neues Zivilisationsprinzip. I've translated that as to create or administrate Rudolf Steiner's social organics, a new principle of civilization. Yeah. Now, the 4th study in this, these social studies, this is called der Urgedanke. Rudolf Steiner's Zivilisationsprinzip und die Aufgabe der Anthroposophical Gesellschaft, which has not been translated, not yet. It's called in English the primal thought, Rudolf Steiner's principle of civilization, and the task of the Anthroposophical Society. And the Urgedanke is an incredible essay on what Rudolf Steiner calls the Urgedanke, the Ungedanke. He says the Urgedanke is the union of concept and percept, and then he broadens this out in a vision of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. Talks about the so-called book question, which has not been solved. And then towards the end, gives his view on the events of 8th of February. And I've translated the last part of his comment on it. As far as the events of February 1925 are concerned, anyone who has had some practice in factual thinking and has the inclination to apply it will easily be able to distinguish what is essential in them from what is not, and will avoid suspicious speculation. That other formulations are conceivable than those which Rudolf Steiner himself considered only provisionally expedient, and thus also such adaptations of the regulatory measures to be taken to comply to the demands of the authorities, which would better express Rudolf Steiner's intention than happened at that time, should not be mentioned. In other words, 8th of February was a provisional. It wasn't according to Rudolf Steiner's ideas, but he said, let's use this for the time being, let's be pragmatic, let's not be dogmatic, and we'll change it slowly in the future. That it is not a matter of questions which concern the foundations of the free school and the society, 8th of February. These are the foundations given by Rudolf Steiner to an ever-striving community that call upon us to create a world of social aesthetic expression by transforming the operationalist attitude of consciousness out of contemporary meditative thinking. Now, this short commentary by Witzenmann on the 8th of February, which is the main question in this whole constitutional debate, the constitutional problem, has been enlarged by one of Herbert Witzemann's close associates and co-responsible for preparing the printing of primal thought. And that is, if I can find it somewhere, this essay, which is called The Primal Thought and the Event of February 8, 1925, or on the legal body blocks game. And it ends with the chapter, The Light of Knowledge and the Inwardness of the Heart. Now, I cannot begin to explain this whole essay, but it's a very, very succinct. It covers all the various problems. It covers the legal questions, and absolutely the bottom line in this is the following. And he also refers to a second opinion of a jurist, the Riemer Gutachten, and that is this. When you ask what are the intentions of Rudolf Steiner, then you have to look at what he intended and not in what was written down in legal documents that may be different somehow. There may be, and there is, a discrepancy between what Rudolf Steiner intended and what was carried out, looking at it from a legal point of view. But even a legalistic point of view always puts in the forefront what was intended. If you look at what was intended, there was a fusion of these two bodies. Because Christmas Conference Society and the General Anthroposophical Society, the building, so they were fused, they were united. And you could look at it as a duality, as a being, like we as human beings have 3 or 4 bodies. We have a physical body, etheric body, astral body, and an eye organization. The General Anthroposophical Society has at least two bodies. A etheric one, and that is the Christmas Conference Society. This form of the new Christianity that wants to descend onto earth. And the renamed Building Association was the physical body, physical social body of the being of the General Anthroposophical. In that way, you can comply, you can understand what Rudolf Steiner wanted. But the chronology says no, there were 2 distinct societies. And that is the problem, that is the constitutional problem. And they cannot solve this, so they say, we have the present General Anthroposophical Society, and this is not the conference of the Christmas Society anymore. So we need to create something else, something new, just like Paul Mackay did, but which was prevented. But it's now being, and I'm looking at the time, we have maybe another 10 minutes or so, but if I may say so, this is an introduction to this theme. I hope to come back and go into more depth and take more various aspects and also translate this essay by Richard Weinberg into English, because it's a very complicated question and it's not always a very pleasant task. You really have to have a lot of love and a lot of inspiration and kindness for the destiny of the Anthroposophical Society, because like the council said in the 40s and the 50s, they issued defense refutations because they considered themselves to be attacked by those who consider the Anthroposophical Society is no longer existent, which has now been actually argued in this chronology and even endorsed by the General Assembly in 2022. Now, this essay by Richard Weinberg ends in this chapter called The Light of Knowledge and the Inwardness of the Heart. And the first paragraph reads, the intention of this publication was to show that Herbert Witzenmann's primal thought, next to possessing general validity for the present age, also as the greatest conceivable actuality with regard to the current situation of the Anthroposophical Society. From the previous pages, it should be clear that the basic decision about the reality of the Anthroposophical Society concerns in the end whether truth is a ready-made reality given to man that remains in essence foreign to him, that he either only reproduces in his cognition, of which he only experiences the effects that he engenders in his subjective organism, or whether man experiences in his thinking the all-encompassing being that penetrates all beings and that is added independently by him to the enigmatic world of percepts. This is the primal thought, the union of concepts of percepts. Concepts are given by the all-encompassing being that penetrates everything, and that man, human being, in his cognitional process adds to the world of percepts that are void of any sense and evidence. And in this way, he creates the reality, and the reality is in turn creates him. It's an oscillation. This is further explained by Witzenmann, and also Richard Warbeck gives a very good review of it. Depending on the position that the human being takes regarding this question, which is not a theoretical one, but an attitude of consciousness, a mindset, he will either look for the soulless, formal, and enveloping structures as the reality of the Anthroposophical Society, which is what the chronology does. They look at a sort of enveloping structure, soulless. They don't look at the inherent life, but they look at the documents, which are abstract, which do not contain life. And consider that what lives in the hearts of people as just sentiment, as a sort of superstructure, or he will in the first place be able to recognize the communal consciousness of people conjoining to an archetypal task as the intrinsic societal reality. This is not the idea of the inverted ritual. That's also in this to create or administrate that, and it's exactly the opposite what happens in these conferences here, where there are 30, 40 people, everyone can give his opinion, his name, also his forum, and then at the end you have no idea what everybody has been saying, and it's a kind of a splittering, an atomization. It's not a union where everyone is looking up to an archetypal thought in which they are added your own personal idea, which will then grow into an aura and elevated to an extent, and then in which the spiritual world can descend and infuses with new impulses. I've never experienced that here at the Goethe, and neither in Holland. He will either consider and propagate a formalism devoid of facts that ignores with soulless frigidity what lives in people as being commensurate with reality, or he will, in the inwardness of the heart of the double exchange of being, make the awakening to the other is never ending, but always a new striving task. Now, this double exchange of being is also an idea of Witzenmann, that in intuition you exchange your being with the world of ideas, and in the small exchange of being, you interchange with the other. You become the other, and the other become you. One of his great books on that is the Statutes, based on Rudolf Steiner's indication. Now, yeah. Now, so I've already said something about the second aspect of this social scientific tri-union conference, what has become the intention of Rudolf Steiner through the statutes has developed in such a way that 9 of these statutes have been abrogated, have been dismembered. But you read nothing about this in this chronology. Although I've kept trying to contribute, even one of my motions in 2022 was the cross of the Christmas conference, a motion to the General Assembly of the General Anthroposophical Society 2022 at the Goethe on do not discharge the Executive Council. That wasn't listened to, and the General Assembly discharged the Council, which had submitted this chronology to the General Assembly. So the General Assembly actually carried out a motion of self-destruct by endorsing this idea that the Anthroposophical Society no longer exists. They laid the Anthroposophical Society to rest in their viewpoint in any case. Now, we don't have that much time anymore to have a close look at this chronology. At the 4th chapter, but in a way, this chronology gives a lot of facts but makes the wrong conclusion. For example, they say on page 30, all the documents of the time of the Christmas conference, 80 years ago or so, give the impression that the writers responsible for their content proceeded from the notion that the association General Anthroposophical Society, that resulted from the renaming of February 8, 1925, is related in one way or another, conceivable continuity and identity with the Anthroposophical Society established at Christmas. So they agree that all these documents point to a continuity, a union, but they don't. But they say, conceived in one way or another, they cannot conceive in their intellectual, abstract thinking that a being can have 2 bodies. A human being has 3 or 4 bodies. The Anthroposophical Society has at least 2 of them. So, and they instead of thinking that, they went into this abstract thought that at April 8th there was the General Anthroposophical, the Building Association, and on the other side left the Anthroposophical Society Christmas Conference, which no longer, they say, exists. Now, and of course there were the council in 1994 issued a paper called Necessary Refutation, and in 1950 a Necessary Defense. And this is what they say. In hindsight, after 25 years, Wachsmuth was of the opinion that he, at the behest of Rudolf Steiner, had commercially registered the Christmas conference through the renaming of the Goethean Building Association. All this happened with the full knowledge of Rudolf Steiner. Therefore, these statutes have been endorsed and registered completely in order with the content of Rudolf Steiner, the whole council, and by the decision of the General Assembly. That was the attitude of the council here until 2000, until Paul Mackay came along and completely reversed that and initiated a sort of palace revolution, a coup d'etat, by completely overturning this idea. And now it continues, its chronology, page 35. One does not have to see a contradiction in the plain truth of Gunther Wachsmuth's statements. Everything could have occurred, just as he remembered it, up to one most important point in the basic understanding of what had at that time been achieved. which then can also cast the right divergent light on Rudolf Steiner's statements given by him, namely, now they say the fact, it's not a fact, it's a judgment. The fact is that by the decision, I go on with what the chronology says, that by the decision of February 8, 1925, made at the extraordinary General Assembly of the Building Association, the new association, General Anthroposophical Society, was formed and could now also be commercially registered, but that the Anthroposophical Society of 1923, as an independent corporate body with a way of life, statutes, and membership initially unaffected, continued to exist. In other words, these splitting. Now, in an effort, I go on, in the effort of Rudolf Steiner to create a unified constitution at the Dornach Center, was hence initially only the council personally identical in both corporate bodies. And the unified leadership was only on this level was initially established. Because of Rudolf's death, things could no longer be pursued and corrected by him. Now are the two most important paragraphs, this whole chapter. It was only through the communication of the Council from March 23, 1925, written by Wachsmuth, and then through the events of the First General Assembly of December 29, 1925, that this fateful misunderstanding could become evident that a totally unified constitution would now have been executed, and hence that also the members of the Anthroposophical Society of 1923 would now, as the decisive members of the Association General Anthroposophical Society, would have to appear and henceforth lead its life according to its statutes. In other words, Gunther Wachsmuth, acting on the requests and the idea of Rudolf Steiner, is termed a liar. You say he was of the opinion, he probably is an old man, he couldn't somehow remember what happened 25 years ago. He was of the opinion. But this is all done in accordance with Rudolf Steiner. So here you have a situation in which the present leadership of the council, the present leader of the social science section, which was put in place by Paul Mackay, who became the head after Schmidt-Brabant, who took away the chair of the social science section from Herbert Witzenmann, 1972. You have a complete reversal of what the council has thought and acted some 80 years, and which Paul Mackay, in all respect, I'm not against people, I'm not criticizing people here, I'm criticizing attitudes of consciousness, mindsets, and actions resulting from them. I'm not criticizing people, but they say that these Wachsmuth at that time made a faithful misunderstanding. And then he says the members were under compulsion to become members of the General Anthroposophical Society of the Building Association. But there was no compulsion, because even later, somewhat later, the second statute of the General Anthroposophical Society says that one should orientate oneself on the statutes. Okay? Now, the fatal misunderstanding was not made by Wachsmuth and his successors, including, of course, to begin with Rudolf Steiner. The fatal misunderstanding was not made in 1925 by the original council, but by those who wrote the chronology and were responsible for it. They made a fatal misunderstanding by only looking at the legalistic and not at the way of life that was conducted for 70, 80 years, trying to realize the statutes. Albert Steffen tried this. He didn't always succeed. I don't want to make Albert Steffen into a kind of ideal person. But in any case, they held to the union of the Christmas conference and the present Anthroposophical Society. And by officially discharging the council in 2022, they abolished this the idea of the Christmas conference, because in the chronology it's no longer existent. Okay, now the third part, and that's how I will answer. I will end with that. And the third conference, which will take place in January, of the social science section, is called "What Wants to Become." Now, I've already hinted at that, if you might say, but the what wants to become is of course after the Entombment, after the official abolition of the Christmas conference, which many other people on the side have already tried to happen, but now it's been official by the council. The council officially in this document said that a Christmas conference no longer exists, and the General Assembly voted to endorse that, discharge the council, not only for its financial, but also for its spiritual work. Now, the resurrection of the entombed Anthroposophical Society can be done by envisioning and restoring the original 15 statutes of the Christmas conference. And how this can be done has been shown, as I have it here. Yeah, here. It's been shown in German again by Reto Andrea Salvadelli, who you might say a certain successor of Herbert Witzenmann, in the seminar for Jugendarbeit in Dornach, where I was 4 years myself a member. He has written in this book Selbstschulungsansätze, attempts of self-education, principles of cognitional knowledge societies. He's written an essay about, in German I translate, free structures and spiritual protection concerning the realization of the statutes of the General Anthroposophical Society. After he has, this was before he wrote in this book on the principles versus the statutes, how 9 of these statutes have been dismembered. So, but before that he wrote this, and he then indicated how these dismembered statutes could be reinstated. And if you do that, you can reshape, and there's a term used for the World Christian Conference, you could reshape the Anthroposophical Society into a vessel for the anthroposophical movement in the spiritual world. Because, as I said, the constitution of the Anthroposophical Society is the form that the spiritual world has inspired Rudolf Steiner to shape, so that this new Christianity can take hold among humanity and the earth by the anthroposophists. That was their original task, which has been forgotten and turned almost into its opposite, meaning Aramanic infiltration, soulless, abstract, legalistic thinking. That's a symptomatic of Aramanic mode of thinking. Now, I'm almost come to the end. I think it's been almost an hour. In my announcement at the end, I said that I would also make a commentary on the work of Yeshayahu ben Aharon. I received on August 9th, when I was preparing myself for these lectures, on Facebook, an article by him. This spectacle I haven't seen before, I'm ready for a new adventure. And you can read it in his blog, in his website, YBA, Yeshaya ben Aharon. And it's amazing. It's almost the same ideas that I've been trying to voice here, except in the sense that he says the Aramaic powers have grown a lot stronger. We must create an Anthroposophical Society, a Michaelic society to withstand it. But the strange thing is, he says, after the Christmas conference, nothing ever happened of any substance. We must start all anew. We must start from scratch. And this I find, so there's no mention of Thomberg, no mention of Herbert Witzenmann idea of social organics, no mention of a new civilization principle to offset the current materialistic one that leads to the war against all, to do nothingness and suicide that was initiated by the Christmas conference, and it is not being put forward and propagated by the present council. No, he completely starts from scratch. He has some success, but there is a law, an occult law by Rudolf Steiner that says, if you want to start something new, always look at the tradition. Is there somewhere of someone that you can attach, that you can align to? And only when there's nothing that you can connect to, you start something new. Now, to my idea, Ben Aharon went against this first part of this occult law, because how can you deny that here there is something you can attach to? I mean, is he ready to point out that this is all a lot of baloney, that I'm just talking illusions? I can understand that he says that Goetheanum, in the last 20 years, nothing has happened to any positive effect, it's a negative. But that since 80 years nothing has happened and we must start scratching new, I think that's an illusion. Second part of this occult gazettes is absolute truthfulness. And he also went against this. Now, I've come to the end of my lecture. I want to refer to this book, Werner Groeb, How the Grail Sites Were Found. Werner Groeb is another person who wasn't able to develop his work spiritually at the Goetheanum about the same time that Witzenmann, in connection with the so-called book question, which needs a whole new lecture to understand that, but the book question concerns the realization of the statute, namely statute number 8, which concerns the book policy that Rudolf Steiner wanted the books to be published with the so-called Hochschulvermerk, the text about the hope, that these books were all part of the Free School for Spiritual Science, which is no longer there, because Mary Steiner started her own book company and didn't think that the Christmas conference could be continued, and didn't think that the free school had any existence anymore. But this is an example of the work of the free school. This book by Werner Groeb, How the Grail Sites Were Found, of which a second edition I published recently. But it is not just one book, it's a chronology. It's a first of three books. And in the second book, which has not been translated, and I will say it out of my memory, the second book in this trilogy, which is a trilogy about the Grail history from Zarathustra via Christ, Caspar Hauser to Rudolf Steiner. It's called From Parsifal to the Rudolf Steiner's Signs of the Grail. He reports all the resistance he got from people that didn't want to honor his contract. He saw the rise of the banks, the financial interests, more and more taking control of the Goetheanum. There's a chapter called Chapter 8 on the new esoteric working of the so-called New Society, in which he prophesizes, and this was written in 1975, towards late 70s, he foresaw that at the end of the situation, the end of the 20th century, anthroposophy would be transformed in the direction of Ahriman. This is something exactly also that Ben Aaron says in a different way. And this move towards Ahrimanic thinking that Van der Groot encountered, and many others too, you can also recognize in this attempt to what I've tried to realize and substantiate, to disband, to negate the continued existence of the Christmas conference and all the ramifications that it has. And I hope it's been a little bit clear. I hope that I'm able to put this on YouTube with an explanation and with links. I thank you for coming, dear Jean-Pierre. And we'll leave it at that, okay?
Welcome.